Victoria is the first stop on a national tour showing people what Canada's trillion-dollar debt looks like. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is driving the debt clock. It's a truck with a digital debt counter mounted to it across the country.
The group is raising the alarm over the fact that this year taxpayers will lose $25 billion just to pay interest on Ottawa's debt.
Taxpayers are losing out on about $25 billion just to pay interest on the government's debt. That's $25 billion that can't be used to hire more nurses, or it's $25 billion that can't stay in taxpayers' pockets because that money is going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street just to pay interest on the debt. And that's why the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is taking the debt clock coast to coast to wake Canadians up.
Well, the group is looking for your support as it continues to call for the federal government to ring in their spending.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation brought its National Debt Clock tour to Kelowna, stopping in at the Packing Horse Pub Wednesday night.
Well, the issue that we see on the pandemic spending is that we didn't see prioritization. I think many Canadians understand that if you have an issue like this, redirect resources. But we haven't seen that level of prioritization, and we haven't seen the federal government find savings in other areas of the budget. And we have to remember that even before the pandemic, in 2018, the federal government was spending all-time highs.
Among those who showed up to hear from Terrazzano and snap a picture with the debt clock was Kelowna Lake Country MP Tracy Gray. The CTF launched its National Debt Clock tour earlier this week in Victoria, and Terrazzano said it was nice to be interacting with people again after so many months of pandemic restrictions.
A hard-hitting reminder today of our growing federal debt as the Canadian Taxpayers Federation brought its National Debt Clock to the Okanagan on its cross-Canada tour.
Right behind me, you see our big national debt clock. It is showing the federal government's $1 trillion debt increasing in real time. The federal debt is increasing by about $400 million every single day, which means that each Canadian is already on the hook for more than $30,000 in federal government debt.
The debt clock made its way around downtown Kelowna today, displaying how quickly our national debt is increasing. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says while COVID-19 added to our debt with more than $500 billion being spent on pandemic and lockdown subsidies, the government was already at an all-time spending high prior to the virus outbreak.
In fact, according to data published by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government isn't projected to balance its books until the year 2070. Many are understandably concerned seeing the debt clock and just how fast Canadian debt is growing.
Kind of makes me think, like, is there going to be like an end in sight? Is there going to be a time in my life where that number is going to go down? It's a bit scary to think about.
Well, I think we better stop spending that kind of money. Tell our governments to give it a rest, you know.
The Tax Federation first introduced the debt clock in the 90s as a way to fight against large deficits and overall government debts.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is driving across the country sharing the national debt clock on the side of a truck. The new digital clock shows the federal debt increasing in real time. They say it's climbing $4,500 every second. Canada has over $1 trillion of debt and rising. The Taxpayers Federation wanted to show the country how much debt Canada is in. They started in Victoria and are making their way across the country.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation's National Debt Clock made a stop in Regina today. The clock is a digital billboard on the side of a truck. The CTF says the debt clock allows for the impact of the federal government's $1 trillion debt to be seen in real time. Every minute, the amount on the clock goes up $4,500 and $400 million every day. Federal Director Frank Terrazzano says the federal debt is not the only issue Canadians are facing.
We need to see the province take balancing the budget more serious as well, because of course taxpayers not only owe debt to the federal government but also to the provincial government as well, and that's why we're staying on the government of Saskatchewan as well. We need to see concrete action to rein in spending and to start reducing provincial debt.
According to the CTF's website, the share of the federal debt for each Canadian citizen is just under $31,000.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is sounding the alarm over runaway deficits. The organization's debt clock tour rolled into Winnipeg this morning. It includes a truck that displays the federal government's debt increasing in real time. Federal Director Franco Terrazzano notes they've had to build a new clock for this tour.
The Trudeau government broke the last clock because the last clock just didn't have enough digits to show the government's $1 trillion debt.
Terrazzano says Canada will pay $25 billion in interest on the debt just this year alone. And he says that debt is going up just under $400 million every day. As for your share, it's equal to about $31,000 per Canadian.
This legislation will increase the debt by another $13 billion. This government thinks it's a non-event, nothing to see here. But the Canadian Taxpayer Federation has a debt clock that shows our debt. And did you know the Liberals broke this clock? It didn't have enough digits. The clock shows our debt is increasing at $4,500 per second. That means that in the minute and a half that I've been speaking, our debt has increased by $400,000. Every 10-minute speech by the Prime Minister adds $2.7 million to our debt. This last year's deficit added well over $300 billion. This year's is $150, and next year's is half of that again.
Well, that video just cost you $50,000.